I'm happy to introduce Henriksen. I met you, I think, Kristoffer, last year, and I certainly found your presentation in Sorø very interesting, very exciting, and also useful when you think of how to challenge the giftedness, or especially the talent. You talk about talent development, and you have made your research in sport. But what is very good is that you also listen to the psychological part. I will just read what I have written down here. Kristoffer is a licensed psychologist, associate professor at the Institute of Sports Science and Clinical Biomechanics at the University of Southern Denmark. This employment includes also a specialized function as a sports psychology practitioner in Team Denmark. That is the Danish elite sport organization. And as far as I know, you travel a lot to and fro different sort of places in the world where we do see sports arrangement, like, I suppose, Olympic and things like that. But we will most likely hear that. Yeah, I think I will not read up all what is written about you. You can see yourself, but certainly Kristoffer Henriksen has got a lot of research experience on what is best practice. We talked about the gap between praxis and theory or research this morning. He do have some answers, I suppose. So let's listen to how we can bridge the gap. As far as I understood, you walk to and fro on each side. So welcome.
Thank you. Sound? Can you hear me? Yeah, now it's on. Thank you very much for the invitation, first of all. I'm happy to be here. It's correct that my professional life is a mix of science and practice, because I work at the university in this city, but also in Team Denmark. Not only 2 days ago, I came back from the World Championships in orienteering, which was in Scotland, where I supported the Danish national team. And I'm glad to say, we had a historically good championship. So that was fun to be a part of. However, what I'm going to, and in that respect, you can say my whole professional, what I do is centered around excellence and performance. But it's in sport. And if any one of you think, well, we can't learn much from sport, now is the time to leave. So now Ole suggested maybe it's because of the strawberry cake. Could also be the subject. I'm not sure. But for those of you who stay, I'll promise you I can share some ideas about what we do in sport when we do best. Because we do not always do very well in sport either. But I was also very interested, by the way, to listen to Professor Plummer's talk a minute ago. And it just really struck me how far the sport world is from the world of education. Because you talk about not wanting to divide classrooms, and in sport we're sort of doing the other way around. We're slowly starting to realize that at 8 years old, separating kids in terms of ability is maybe not always such a good idea. At least it has sometimes it has some implications that we do not like. But I'll come back to some of that. Today I'll talk about my research, which is about successful athletic talent development environments, or what I've termed the ecology of talent development in sport. But I'll just start, though, by saying a little bit about the nature of talent. How do we consider talent? Because there's been, by the way I see it anyway, there's been 3 different research waves in sports psychology research in talent development. And these research waves are mirrored in the practices that we do in sports psychology. Now, the first wave was what I call a biological perspective on talent development. Basically, in this line of research, people thought, well, talent is innate, at least partly innate. It's for the few. Not everybody is talented. And it separates those who are going to achieve good things later in life from those who are not going to be able to do that. And it may not be possible to see talent in full bloom when kids are maybe, 8, 10 years old. But if you've been there long enough as a coach and you have a nose for it, you'll be able to see who's got, chance of becoming good and not. And in this whole research wave, there was a lot of focus on how do we select, how do we identify the most talented football players, the most talented swimmers, and so forth. There was a lot of test batteries developed that included physiological, anatomical, psychological measures, and so forth. I think this is like maybe around 25, 30 years back that the main research was on this. However, we also discovered in this research wave that it's not very easy. It's really hard to predict who's going to be the next Leonard Messi. And we don't really know what to look for. We can do all these testing batteries, but in effect, very often we're not very successful in predicting who's going to be elite level athletes. And this is despite of the self-fulfilling prophecy, which is that if I say yes, yes, sorry, 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 yes, yes, sorry, sorry, it's very likely that the ones who got a yes will be best later on. Not because they are most talented, but probably more because they are giving a completely different package afterwards. More attention from the coaches, more, better playing positions, more time with the ball, whatever. This kind of stuff. These two kids are from a Norwegian kayak environment. The big one here, he's 1 year younger than that guy. So it's not very hard to see who's going to win more championships right now. And when I asked the coach, why is he even allowed in the training community? And then he said to me, the big guy, he's never going to be really good. He's so strong right now, he just paddles. He doesn't learn much. He just paddles and he wins everything. The little guy, on the other hand, he has to concentrate on every little thing just to follow the big guy. So if at one point he goes boop, 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 like the other one, then he'll have the whole package. So this is just this is a coach who in practice understands that it's really difficult to predict and to select talent. Now this was one research wave. Then after a while, I think actually starting with some research in chess and other areas, we developed, or the field turned into what I've termed a more psychological perspective on talent development. And in a psychological perspective, the argument is that it's not really what you're born with, it's not the innate qualities that determine who's going to be world champion, it's the amount and the quality of training they do. So basically those who win the world championships and Olympic medals, they're the ones who've been training the hardest or the best or the most or whatever. So it doesn't matter so much. Of course, if you have to be pretty tall to be a swimmer, stuff like this. But then again, if you're really motivated, you can become another sports person in another sport. So that's not much of the issue. In this research wave, they do not agree though. So things they're discussing is, for instance, how early should we specialize? How early should you only swim if you want to be a swimmer? And what kind of balance should we have between deliberate practice, which is hard, structured practice, organized by adults only with one purpose, to be better. And then on the other hand, the deliberate play, which is more of the sort of self-organized, going out, playing in the backyard, playing street soccer, and all this kind of stuff. And we have a number of studies showing that one road, like the early specialization, lots of deliberate practice, leads to world-class performance. We also have lots of studies showing that a much more flexible approach can also lead to world-class performance. The benefits of specializing late and not having too much structured practice in a too early age is that we have a lot less injuries and a lot less dropout also, because the kids don't grow as tired of doing their sport as they otherwise could. This was the second sort of wave in talent research in sport. And now I would like to sort of present a third wave. And it's a little bit self-inflated to call it a wave already. But this is where I sort of see the field as moving into, at least this is one of the directions. And it happens to be the direction that I personally am doing research in. And this is more of an ecological perspective. And all of my most of my research has focused on developing the holistic ecological perspective to talent development in sport. Now, this perspective sort of changes the focus or the attention from the individual athlete in terms of identification or selection, or in terms of the amount and quality of training, and onto the environment in which this athlete is embedded. And it also sort of suggests that some environments are more successful than others, but I'll just come back to that. But focus is on the entire environment. This approach shifts the attention. It suggests that some environments are more successful than others, and that it simply makes sense for us to investigate these successful environments, because we can learn something about how to create optimal development environments. And it suggests that we use a case study approach to investigate these environments. And a case study approach is basically investigating real-life phenomena within their real-life context, using multiple sources of data. In my case, observations, interviews, looking in training diaries, and as much information basically as possible, and making thick descriptions of particular environments. And I'll give you an example of this. So this is like a third wave, and this is where we're going to be today, what I'm going to talk about today. Now, to anchor the empirical investigations, or to start the research, we had to develop a framework. And in this framework, I was inspired by three main theories. Ecological psychology suggested to view the athlete as embedded in an environment, and to depict this environment as a series of nested structures. I don't know if you know Bronfenbrenner's model, but it's like basically going from a micro environment to larger and larger settings, and up until a macro environment. The systems theory inspired me to view environments as systems that have components, that have a structure, that have functions inside. And cultural psychology directed my attention to the importance of culture as a sort of collective programming of the mind, and to view culture as a multi-level phenomenon, ranging from like national culture. It's very different what we do in perhaps Denmark versus the US or China or whatever. What would work here will not necessarily work in other places. But also microcultures, the cultures that exist in small teams. Or group culture, you could say. Now this is the framework. The framework consists of two working models, and this is the first one. This is a model that allows me to describe the environments. What are the components and the structure of the environment? The model has the talented or the prospective elite athletes in the core, as a core, and the team or the sports team or the sports club around also in the core, with managers, coaches, experts, and so on. Can you even see this? A little bit, yeah. Other components of the environment are structured in two levels, a micro level, and the micro level is where the athletes spend a good part of their daily life, and a macro level which does not contain the athlete, but affects them nonetheless. This can be like school systems, federations, sports federations, and things like this. And it's all situated in a time frame of past, present, and future, because, as you know, these environments are always dynamic and ever-changing. So this model just basically allows me to describe what are the parts of the environment. We also developed a second model, which we call the environment success factors model, which allows us to structure the factors that contribute to the environment's success. And taking as a starting point the preconditions, money and facilities and stuff, that's part of the environment. This model illustrates how the process of daily training, like what happens in everyday life, has three different outcomes. The individual athlete who develops and achieves team achievements in team sport, and also sort of the development of an organizational culture. So, as part of what we do in everyday life, what happens is a certain culture, group culture develops. And this idea of organizational culture, which I borrowed from Edgar Schein, is very central to this model. And basically, it's depicted as 3 different layers. The artifacts are things you see when you first enter an environment. What clothes people wear, the stories they tell you immediately after you meet them, the buildings and all this kind of stuff. The next level is the one called espoused values. These are the values, the social principles, the goals, and so forth that we show to the world. When we stand up on a Friday evening and we give a talk and we say, this is what we want to do, and all this kind of stuff. This is our espoused values. It's not always, though, that that these are very well connected, the espoused value and what we actually see in the environment. And this is explained by a deeper level of basic assumptions that are typically so integrated that we don't even see them and never, just take them for granted. And the culture is also organized or can be explained as an organization of key basic assumptions that govern how we do things here in this particular team or in this particular club. So this is sort of integrated into what we could call a cultural paradigm. I'll give you an example of this in a minute. Those were the 2 working models. Now we took those models and then we went out and tested them and tried to investigate. So we selected a number of successful environments. And you might not know these, but basically they are the Danish national 49ers sailing team, which is again a very successful talent development environment and have produced several Olympic medalists. A kayak environment in Norway, an elite sports school that had a kayak environment. It was a track and field club in Sweden, 2 football clubs, one of which was the Ajax Amsterdam Academy. A talent hotbed in cycling and karate, and finally a less, if not unsuccessful, golf environment, which we investigated to sort of test our ideas, because if they did exactly the same things as the successful ones, we would be in trouble. Luckily, it turned out, that they didn't. So, but these are the empirical material that are behind what I'm going to talk about next. I do not have time to explain to you these environments in any detail. Since they're case studies, I have made really sort of thick descriptions of these environments. But I can give you an idea of how these working models that you saw before are adapted to reflect the unique features of the empirical or of the environments that we investigated. And this first model is a model of the Vang kayak team in Norway. This was an elite sports school that had, I think, 10 or 12 different sports you could be a part of, and one of these was kayak, and kayak had been hugely successful over the years in this particular environment. I won't go into detail, but I'll just say a very important thing here is that the center of this environment, sort of the axis of goodness, is a very, very strong link between the young, talented athletes that I investigated and a whole community of former and current elite-level athletes. These elite-level athletes included coaches, mentors, national team coaches, club coaches, and so forth. And basically, very often what the coaches did was they would just take part in training. They would paddle alongside these young athletes or invite them in rather than take a classic coach role or start to explain stuff or structure training. So it was very much an environment where you would share knowledge and share ideas and train together much more than it was a classic coach-athlete relationship. You will also notice that the environment is sort of skewed to the athletic side. Not very many components on the non-athletic sides are attributed any importance by these athletes, which I guess is fairly common in elite sport. And even the school has an elite sport profile. So in this sense, you could say it really is an elite sport environment, and that's why it's skewed to this side. These athletes have a number of different relations also to other clubs, meaning that if you, for instance, in a summer holiday are going to another part of Norway and you want to train, you're more than welcome to come do that. So basically, it's not just this club against this club against this club. It's a whole community of Norway against the rest of the world. I think there's a lot for us to learn from that. When I then look at the less successful environment, the seaside golf team, a main result here is that there are no connecting lines between the school coaches and the club coaches, between the coaches and the teachers, between teachers and family. There's just no dialogue there. And this is actually a boarding school. So the teachers, the coaches, the athletes, they live on the same school. They have their lunch together every day. And still, there's no integration of efforts. This illustrates like a disconnected environment where the only integration there is through the individual athlete. So he can say to one coach, the other coach told me, but the coaches would not talk together. And this was quite stressful for the athletes. If we look at the other model, the first one here again depicts the Vang kayak team. And you'll see that there's a lack of financial preconditions. The environment did not have much money, but the environment really benefits from a very strong organizational culture, a really strong set of ideas about how we do things here at this place, centered around an open training community with proximal role models and a clear hierarchy also, but also centered around openness, sharing knowledge, training together, inviting people in, and so forth. This was a very strong environment and created athletes that were very autonomous, very good at taking responsibility, very good at asking for advice. So they would very often go to the best paddlers in the whole world and ask questions. How do you do this, and so forth. These things come together to produce environment effectiveness measured in terms of school results, but mainly, of course, sports results. And again, if you look at the seaside golf team, it's a completely different story. Here you'll see an organizational culture. Actually, the facilities were very good. They had plenty of money and good facilities, and the whole school was structured that you could live there, you could train there, you could do all your stuff at the school. So the facilities wouldn't be better than this. But the organizational culture was extremely incoherent, meaning that there was a gap between what we say we do and what we actually do. And this was very visible for me when I visited the environments. For instance, they would say that a value for us is to create global responsible citizens that are able to enact in a globalized world and take responsibility for their own training and so forth. And what I would watch when I came there was that everybody came late for training, no one warmed up for training and so forth, and there was just huge gaps. This could only be explained by these basic assumptions. For instance, saying that we are a business. We can't afford to throw athletes away just because they're late for training. And also it was I guess the school was sort of founded in the aftermath of 1968, and they had troubles placing too much demands on people. They didn't like that too much. These were examples. Now if we move from these examples towards more of a recipe, what we found was that every successful environment was unique. Not two environments were the same. However, they also shared a number of features, or they in many ways employed the same principles in their work. And I'll now sort of go through a number of these principles, try to show you what were sort of the principles that these more successful environments employed. And the first one was a very sort of clear integration of efforts. And by this I mean that the teachers in the school, the coaches and everybody else would talk together. And it wouldn't be the individual athlete who would have to run around and try to coordinate the environment. These things would happen between the different parts of the environment. I love to tell stories, and I'll tell you a few. And one of them is when I visited the Swedish track and field team. One afternoon when I was sitting there, these athletes would come to their coach, and the coach would say, Peter, today you won't take part in the hard part of the training because I know you have a small injury thing, and Sophia, you have to leave at 7 o'clock because I know you have a German assignment for tomorrow, and I know you have not finished, so you have to go back and do that. And then I'd ask her, how do you know all this? And she'd say, well, I don't really know. And I'd say, well, I've been here a few times and you always know, so how do you know? And basically what she says, I pop by the teachers, where they have their breaks in the lunch break. And, just ask about, and I can log on to the school's IT system to see if they have assignments or if they have, So I just make sure, because basically what she thought was we need to create a whole environment that suits these athletes and not just focus on, doing high quality exercises or whatever. And this was very clear, one of the very clear things. One of the teachers, or the performance director at Vang, he explained it to me like this. He said, when an athlete applies for days off to go to a competition or camp, a teacher's first expression, the school teacher, must never be, oh no, not again, because I'll have to do extra assignments, but always, well done. So we have to want our athletes to do well in sport if we are an elite sport school. On the other hand, an athlete at Seaside Golf Team, he told me this. He said, our school teachers may know what sports we do, but it's not, they're going there for 3 years, right? They may know what sports we do. It's not something they care about. Certainly don't know our tournament plan. Our coaches know just as little about when we are loaded with homework. It's not my impression that they ever talk to each other. And this is a school setting where they meet every day for lunch. Okay, couldn't be easier. A second feature was actually, and this comes back a little bit to Professor Plugger's talk a minute ago, or a while ago. In sport, we have a tendency to put people very early into elite groups. Basically when they are 8, 9, 10, you'll have a coach. After 3-4 days of football practice, you'll go A team, B team, C team, and like this. Yeah? And it has consequences. First of all, we separate friends. Second of all, we don't really know who's going to be best after all, so we just make sure that the ones that may have become really good don't really get a chance to develop and so forth. So in sport, we need to do this less. And what I found interesting was that in these elites, in these very, very successful talent development environments, they were not very preoccupied with making small elite teams. A very open community. In the track and field community, there were 40 athletes in the age group that I investigated. 40 athletes. Some of them were national team athletes. Some of them were actually national team athletes in a different sport, just taking part in the track and field training 3 times a week because it's good physical exercise. And there was room for that. And when you ask the good athletes, do they not find it, annoying or boring or whatever to have? They said, no. Because when they ask us stuff and we have to explain how we do stuff, we actually benefit from that a lot. I don't know if, I know it's so maybe we can sort of say that, in the world of gifted education, I got the feeling that you need to move a little bit this way and we need maybe to, but we are on different ends of this, parameter. On the other hand, though, the coaches were very clear. You have no access to these groups if you don't want to be there. And by want to be there, I mean you come there and you train really hard every day. And I saw several times, or a few times anyway, that a coach would say to a young athlete, I can see you're not really there today. Just go home. Come back tomorrow. No. I'll be better. I promise go back. Come back tomorrow. Okay? So when you do that a few times, they learn the lesson. A third one was the idea of proximal role models. And by proximal role models, I mean that the role models are not some people we see on television or read about in the papers or whatever, which the elite level athletes very often are. In all of these environments, there was a clear daily link between the talented athletes, the group of young talented athletes, and the very, very best in the world. So they would be around these athletes every single day. They would ask them questions. In the sailing environment, They would ask questions about everything from training to how do you handle girlfriends, where do you borrow money for the next boat, what kind of hotels do you book, everything, So there would just be this constant exchange of ideas and knowledge between the elite level athletes and the young athletes. This is very much in contrast to what I often see in elite sport, where there is a tendency, to sort of make sure that the elite level athletes are not burdened by having to explain stuff to the younger athletes. This is a mistake. There's no need, especially with the professional athletes. They have 24 hours a day like anyone else. They're not going to break because they spend 10 minutes helping young athletes, but they tend sometimes to think so. Another feature that the successful environments shared was the idea of not specializing too early, having training that allowed for diversification. It's very easy if you want your athletes to produce very good, like under 15 results. What they have to do is they have to train a lot, and they have to train hard, and they have to train really specialized. Only that specific position on the playing field, and certainly only that sport. If you want them to be good at 25, when it's time for the Olympics, you need to employ a different kind of principle, which is to allow for diversification. And in these successful environments, they were very good at that. These are images taken from the Norwegian kayak environment that I talked a little bit about before. They had their yearly basis training championship, where they sort of, they find the best all-round athlete. And this was highly prestigious to be the best all-round athlete. As you can see, they were, doing pull-ups and playing mini golf and walking, and they were running and mountain biking and dragging big heavy rocks and all kinds of stuff. The best all-round athlete, very, very prestigious. The guy who hangs there, when he was 20, he was in top 10 in the Norwegian under 20 probably championships in 4 different sports. In kayaking, which was maybe his main sport, cross-country skiing, biathlon, and a sport where you do cross-country skiing running behind a dog on a leash. I didn't know that one existed, but still impressive though. And the coach would say to me, well, he's 20 now, he should probably choose soon. Right? I mean, normally we ask them to choose when they're 12. In the track and field environment, what I saw was that organized by the local wrestling team, they would have 2 days a week in the wrestling club because it's good training, and it's good to do other stuff. And the sailors, again, as a for instance, they will take part in maybe the Danish championships in 4 or 5 different types of boats, even when they are on the Olympic level. Because again, it's good, to do different boats, and you can learn different things from them. Another feature was a long-term development focus. So rather than wanting a short-term success, these teams these successful environments were very good at having a long-term focus. And we always say this, you need to have a long-term development focus. But they also did this in practice. As to give an example, in the track and field environment, one of the young runners who was by far the best in her age group, and there was the Swedish championships, and she would really like to go. But she also had a small injury, not more than any adult would have taken like a few ibuprofens and done it anyway. But what they did was they told her, look, we know you're really good. It's not important for you to win the Swedish championships. You have to be good when you're 25 and you're going to the Olympics. So, just stay home, relax, get over that injury. And the best part was, before they told her, they phoned and discussed this with the club coach and the national team coach and the parents and the school teachers and whatever. So that whoever she would ask, they would say the same thing to her. Because that's not an easy decision, But they would really do that. There was a room for what I could say called free initiative. And by this I mean that if you want to train, you can train. You don't mean, you never meet like a locked down classroom. Sorry, physics is over. Or you can't step on the grass kind of thing when you're at football training or whatever. It was always possible to go to training. And if you were in one team and you had to go to the dentist at 10 o'clock where you were meant to be training, you can train with the other team at 12. So even though you don't belong to that particular team, you're more than welcome there. And this was sort of in all the different environments very clear. No one who wanted to train was not allowed to or not given the opportunities to. And then, and I talked about this already a little bit when I presented the two environments, then there was this idea about a strong and coherent organizational culture. And basically what I mean by this is that there's a big correspondence between what we say we do and what we actually do. This is not always the case. I see that very often in different environments, that we say we want to be the best place for kids to be, friends and train together, but we still do ABC teams, not looking at who is friends with whom or whatever. But in these environments, they really did that a lot. These images or the pictures here are from the training facilities. So the training facilities were really sort of low standard. On the other hand, in this training facility, the strength and conditioning room, there was this newspaper clip, and here it says, "Old heroes never rust." And there's an image of the newly Olympic champion who just came back only a short time ago from Olympic championships with a gold medal, and he's rowing paddling the Norwegian championships together with a 65-year-old guy who used to win medals, in World Championships many, many years ago. And what he says to this paper is, "I can still learn a lot from that older guy." I'm not sure he really could, but that's a very strong signal in a culture where you want athletes to learn from each other and things like this. That it doesn't stop even when you're at the Olympic level. Another feature was the idea of openness, sharing knowledge. Elite sport can be extremely secretive. Coaches don't want to share their ideas with other coaches. Athletes don't want to share their secrets with other athletes and so forth. What I found in all these environments was actually the opposite, that everybody was sharing knowledge all the time, and coaches meeting in groups, athletes meeting in groups, just to share knowledge as much as it was possible. And one of the sailors, presented like this. He says, as sailors, we are a national team, but we are also competitors for one spot at the Olympics. Right now, for instance, in the 49er group, we have 3 boats in top 5 in the world. One of them gets to go to the Olympics. But we are the only nation who to solve this dilemma by working together, and I'm damn proud of that. And still today, I know that these 3 boats, they do all their training together. They do all their evaluations of the training together. Even though, 3 boats in top 5 in the world. And then there was a focus on, developing not only the athletes as athletes, but as whole persons. Basically saying that when you are part of this environment, what you should take away from this is not just to be a good paddler or a good sailor or a good track and field athlete. You need to become a good person. So they were very, preoccupied with what is it that we want our athletes to learn by being in this environment. Again, a sailor explains it like this: you are here on your own initiative. Developing your talent is your own responsibility. No one invites you. No one holds your hand. You have to kick the door in, and that's how it should be. So these athletes really learn to be proactive, to seek, advice, to come up and say, can I be a part of the evaluation meeting tonight? Is it okay for me to take part in the training? Things like this, And they become quite strong in terms of social skills. Here's another quote. Again, this is also a picture for that basis training championship I told you about before. And when I asked Erik Veros Larsen, the Olympic gold champion, he explained it to me like this. He says, they learn to acknowledge that there are no shortcuts, only hard training. No money, only sacrifices for the sport, and never enough time, only efficiency and discipline. And that, I think, pretty much wraps it up, right? A bit hardcore, perhaps. but still. So these were the features that were shared among these environments, and sort of like a recipe. But bear in mind, though, that this is a world conference, and as I presented before the empirical background, you might have seen that it's from a very narrow geographical area, right? It's Scandinavia and Holland, basically, the Netherlands. So we still have a long way to go to see how these successful environments are culturally situated, and how the culture, may mean that the workings of successful environments might be different in different cultures and different countries. Allow me just to provide like a short link or a bridge to applied sports psychology, which is also my field. And I just want to show you that the whole idea about these notions of talent has a very, very big impact on how we do practice. And basically, if you take the biological perspective and you say, okay, talent, who wins the next world medal depends on the innate capacities. What you'll do as a sports psychologist is you will try to develop test batteries to select and identify and find out who's the most talented and who's not, because we don't want to spend resources on athletes who are not going to be good anyway. So this is sort of the general idea if you take that perspective on what athletic talent is. If you take a psychological perspective, you would say, well, a winning mindset or to be mentally strong is something we should develop in targeted exercises. So we would say, well, fair enough, some are strong mentally when they come here, some are less so, but they can all be taught to be strong. So we want to make exercises, we want to do workshops and so on, that sort of enables these athletes to become stronger and stronger from a mental perspective, just like we do in physical training and technical training and so forth. This is basically the idea that has been prevalent for the last maybe 10, 20 years in sports psychology. And if you take this more ecological perspective, you would say, well, mental strength or a winning mindset doesn't necessarily have to grow out of or to be a product of targeted workshops. Maybe it could simply sort of grow out of the culture that is the daily training environment. So basically, if you are in an environment where you're not, no one holds your hand, and where you have to, if you want to become good, you have to ask someone who's better than you to share their knowledge and share their ideas, and so then you build strong social skills. If you are in an environment where people keep sending you texts, remember there's training today at 3 o'clock, and doing everything for you, and when you get there, your shoes are washed and your clothes are folded, and this is not science fiction, man. This is what happens in the football clubs. You very, very quickly learn that I can just sort of lean back and hope for best. And you will never become good. And then we can do whatever we want to in our workshops as sports psychologists. It's not going to work if the culture sort of doesn't collaborate. So the basic message there is that it's not unimportant how we see talent. It makes a world of difference in terms of sort of the applied work or the practices that we engage in. I just want to finish by presenting a definition of talent. I know that you're probably far ahead of us in terms of terminology and definitions, and I know, and in sport we have huge problems in terms of this, because in one study you could say what differentiates from a mental perspective the best in the world from the next best, and you will say world champions and Olympic champions will be the best. Those who participate at the Olympics but don't win, they will be the next best. But then in the next study, you will say everybody who goes to the Olympics are best. So the ones that are control group in one study will be part of the elite group in the next study, and this just means that it's one big mess when we have all these different studies about a winning mindset, for instance. But I want to just present a different definition of what talent is, and I find this to be very helpful. So if we define it from an ecological perspective, talent is a set of competencies and skills that are developed on the basis of both innate potential and training, or multi-year interactions with the environments, training and competitions and so forth, as well as the ability to exploit the strengths and compensate for the weaknesses of the environment and to contribute to its development. And I think this is something we overlook very often. We have athletes that are maybe very strong in a physical perspective, very talented from that, but they're not able really to go into the environment, and they can't really contribute. And if someone doesn't hold their hand, or if they're not reminded to do all their exercises, they don't really get to do them, and so forth. So I think maybe we are overlooking the idea that part of being talented is also part of being able to go into a group and get the maximum out of it. And what doesn't happen in that group, maybe I can compensate by finding it somewhere else. So if my coach is not very good at this particular aspect, I ask someone else for help in that aspect. Yeah, that pretty much wraps it up. And yeah.
That was a wonderful, inspiring, and interesting. We are not individuals on our own. We can, in fact, work together and support, and the environment means a lot. And you means a lot for the one you are sort of training. Anyway, few questions. You are welcome to, you have the microphone. Thank you so much. So, when I saw him a year ago, he jumped into the water in Sorø Sea just to keep fit. Was it after or before the dinner? I don't know. But anyway, you came back.
Yeah.
I'm just taking a swim, he said. It was dark. And
Kristoffer, thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. I'm a principal in a school in Melbourne in Australia, and I have very high-performing girls. I'm a principal of a girls' academic select entry school. But when we get to year 12, which is their year before university, I get a lot of data from them where they self-doubt and they lack confidence. They perform well in the end anyway, and they get the highest places into university. But what do you do for athletes who self-doubt or kind of lack confidence? As a group, as a community, what can we do?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. It's a really good question, and it bridges also the gap to the applied work. And I can tell you, for instance, when I've been to the Olympics, for instance, or World Championships and so forth with athletes many times, and I have never met an athlete who didn't have serious self-doubt before important competitions. And I think some of the problem is that we talk about it as if you are mentally weak, if you have doubts, or if you don't feel confidence. And basically what happens, in the last couple of hours before an important race is that you start thinking you're not well enough prepared. You start looking around, you see your competitors, everybody else looks so strong, You start doing your warm-up exercises, for instance, and the other ones are running faster than you. So you start speeding up your warm-up exercises, even though you've worked meticulously, and you know exactly what kind of zone you really should be in, and so forth. All of this is just going on in your head. It's one big mess. And what we do in the national teams that I'm a part of is we talk a lot about how natural this is. This is there all the time, and the objective is not to take it away. It's to ask yourself, okay, I do not like this particularly, but what do I want to stand for? What person do I want to be in that kind of adversity and so forth? So we basically, we train it. We have sessions where we do mindfulness exercises, for instance, training, the ability to register all these different thoughts and emotions that come around when you're about to do something important, and different diffusion techniques that we can then use, to make these thoughts take a little bit less of a hold in us. And then we discuss values with them a lot. So, that life is, the good life is not the life without worry. It's a whole life. It's a life with worry and achievements and looking forward and all that stuff. And who do I want to be as an athlete? What do I want people to say about me when I finish? Those kind of questions we spend a lot of time on in the applied work, and much more than we try to maybe get rid of uncomfortable feelings or worry or self-doubt or lack of confidence. And that's part of the game, basically. So, and I think this openness is extremely important because sport can be very macho.
yes.
Can you tell us a bit more about the condition long term? You explained about a So, do you understand my question?
Yeah. I think that's another thing that I would like to do more of in terms of developing this research. Right now, the research has been sort of very snapshot. Okay, so we take an environment with athletes who are between sort of 16 and 18. We look at this as an environment, and we can sort of say, okay, these are the features that make sure this environment is successful. What would be really cool, though, would be to follow environments across time to see how they also adapt to adapting demands. I'm quite sure that a successful environment for 12-year-olds will be different from the ones that are 16-year-olds, and also an elite sport environment at the very top level where performance is a demand, like on an everyday basis almost. There will also be differences in terms of what are successful environments at these levels. But I do not know. What I do know is, though, that we have a huge problem with dropout from sport. That very often is not because they're not good or not becoming better, but because they're suffering injuries, because they are training too much of the same and they sort of get bored, it just becomes too much. They're giving up too much. So already when you're 14 years old, your coach will tell you, oh, you know, if you're really an athlete, you won't go to your mama's 50-year-old birthday or whatever, because, you know, a real athlete will prioritize training. But by 14, man, you know, put a little bit of goodwill in the bank, you know, you're going to need it later, you know. But definitely these environments will develop over time, I'm sure. I don't know.
Any more questions? Yeah.
Fine.
Few more minutes, and you will get a cake.
All the good ones are gone.
All good things come to those who wait. George Harrison album.
Hi, thank you. I really liked your presentation. I have a question about, you mentioned early specialization and deliberate practice versus late specialization and deliberate play.
Yeah.
Does it somewhat depend on the type of sport? Because, for example, like gymnastics, that's typically a sport where it's a young sport, and girls in particular, they peak really at young ages. And I see, I have a daughter who's in a talent development program in gymnastics right now. She's only 7.
Yeah.
And they want her to practice 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. I have some concerns about that, but it seems to be that the way it is, at least for gymnastics.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that for, you know, across different sports?
That's actually the way we talk about it today. What we say today is, you know, late specialization is good for some sports, but it wouldn't work everywhere, because there are sports where you need to peak early, and those will have like a different kind of setup. I would like, though, to question that logic a little bit, because it's true that's the way it is today. The same goes for swimming. I come from a background of swimming, so I can relate to that a little bit more, but it's sort of the same thing. If you do not swim really well by 7 or 8, and you're not already on the competition team, and say you are 10 years old, and you come to a club and you say, you know, I want to try competition swimming. There's no way in hell you'll ever get a chance to even try. There is no spot. There's someone better than you, and you won't be able. So what we basically say is you have to start early. Yes, you have to start early right now because the structure is like this. But it's not necessarily because there's an open window of motoric development or whatever the arguments might sometimes be. I want to question that idea. And for instance, in badminton, I know that in Asia, the model tends to be badminton is an early development sport. You need to develop really early. You need to do like you do in gymnastics. I can just tell you that Denmark has also some of the world's best badminton players, and they are all best when they are like 28 to 32. This is more expensive because 30-year-old athletes, they want a car and they want a mobile phone and all that kind of stuff. So in that kind, you know, that's terrible. But we've proven them wrong, you know. So in all youth championships, we are like far behind. But when we go to the Olympics, we take medals every time in badminton.
There might be one more question while we are about to finish. Do we see any transfer to the cognitive development, to the cognitive sort of, or to the emotional?
That's a big. There are research groups that are investigating this on a very high level. You know, I think it's too, for me, it's too early to say if doing sport will improve your cognitive
We would
abilities.
like you to look into that and invite you next time you've got a
You should invite someone else.
research paper, because it's quite interesting, this sort of...
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Any more questions? Fine. There is one. Short. Just
Short and sweet.
because we have to give him a present from the World Council and the local committee.
Thank you. In your speech, you spoke about the role that parents play. And in the United States and also in other places around the world, parents are often very aggressive when it comes to supporting their individual athlete. This is also true in education.
Yeah.
We see a great crossover, and I wondered if you might make some comments about having parents see more than just their own child and having a more global view.
Yeah, I'm really glad you say that, because I can completely recognize that picture of parents. In these environments, we tended to see that the teams or the clubs that we investigated had a very sort of sharply formulated policy on parent involvement in sport. And those would typically mean, for instance, there would be a policy saying, you're welcome to go to a competition, but you will be given a task that is for everybody. Like, you're the one who makes lunch to everybody, or you're the one who, whatever, you know. So you're not allowed to come if you only focus on your own kid. And this was, and you know, and in the sailing environment, they actually had a policy of actively keeping parents away. And I remember, I've got to tell you this story. I remember this one particular episode where a very, very talented young Danish sailor, she was on a development team and not receiving quite as much fund, as much money as the parents would have liked. So the mother would call in and say, you know, she's ready to go to the next level and she's ready to go to the senior team and then in the end, what the coach or the manager, the sport manager of the federation would say, I'm sorry to this girl. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to take you off the national team because your parents are not yet mature enough for you to be on that team. They really did, you know. So she was off the team for half a year until she rebelled enough to say, look, just leave me alone so I can sail.
So do take an ecological perspective, it seems,
Yeah.
including the parents. Yeah, okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.